Hello, Stay, and welcome to Stray Kids the Megaverse, the YouTube channel, where I, despite having no idea how to use YouTube, decide to try anyway. For those of you who don't know me, which is probably most of you, because the YouTube algorithm has no way to know to target only people who do know me. My name is Lullaby B. I am the host of the Stray Kids the Megaverse podcast, where I primarily talk about all things Stray Kids that don't have to do with their music, and repeatedly state that I am not a music analysis podcast. So I guess I'm a music analysis YouTuber instead. I maintain my standard go-to statement that I only have so much ability to do music analysis of the lyrics of Stray Kids songs because I don't speak Korean, and I think you're missing like a lot of things there. However, I allowed myself to be a lot peer pressured into doing a YouTube channel of therapist analysis videos after the solo music videos for Hop came out. So in case it wasn't obvious based on that statement, I am a clinical social worker. I'm a therapist. I guess the social worker part would not have been inherently obvious. And I was talking on Threads about having a lot of thoughts about some of the music videos that came out for Hop. I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of music videos in general, from a kind of clinician analysis perspective. And people were really, really interested in that type of reaction video. So congratulations, you convinced me into doing therapist reacts videos. If you haven't really watched the music videos much, this is a terrible reaction video to watch. This will be a lot of, like I said, analysis. As a little bit of perspective on where I'm coming from with the thoughts and takes. So, like I said, I'm a clinical social worker. I'm a therapist. I also have a background in game design. I really, for a minute there, wanted to be a narrative designer. So I have a lot of love for stories, and one of my primary modalities as a therapist is in narrative therapy. So that is to say, what are the stories that we tell ourselves about the past? What are the stories that we're telling ourselves about the present? And then how can a slight shift of frame change the way that we interpret those stories? So a lot of my perspective is about the different ways that we can analyze a given story, and we can, like, the different types of things we can take from the story. This is going to be part 1 of 2. So I wanted to group the reactions to the music videos by kind of vibe, genre, theme, something. And I wanted to group Railway, Unfair, and Hallucination together. And then I started taking notes on Railway and realized that it would just be an obscenely long video. I don't know how long this is going to be. It could be 30 minutes. It could be 3 hours. I have no idea how long just Railway is going to take. So I decided to split Railway and then Unfair and Hallucination into a part 2. And then Hold My Hand is going to be its own separate thing. It's going to be a companion video along with the podcast episodes that I'm doing on the Neuroplatonic Ideal. So those will be out first, and then I'll do Hold My Hand. But first, we're just going to do Railway for this video. The way that I'm going to split this, and the way that I'm going to frame it, is that first, we're going to do just an overview of the video, just like normal speed, normal perspective, just get on the same page about what's happening in the story, because there's a few different ways that you can interpret the story. And so let's make sure that we're doing our analysis based on the same story interpretation. So just basic story interpretation. And then we're going to take a break from watching a video. We're going to dive into some of the different analysis pathways of the video. So the video itself is a textual analysis, right? Like we're just doing first the text of what's happening in the story. And then we have our extra textual analysis. So what's the context of the story that we've seen? And what, from, again, like a clinician perspective, because I think that that's the unique perspective that I'm bringing into this, sort of the question of, if a client came to me and said, I made this piece of artwork and I want to talk about what it means to me, these are some of the thoughts I would have and some of the questions I would have. So textual, extra textual, clinical, and then we will go back through the video at an obscenely slow speed and pull all of that together to more deeply do that close read dive. I will say now, before we get into this, it's something that I repeat a lot on podcast. It's something I will repeat a lot in general. Unless I am saying specifically, this is what the artist has said about what this means to them, and unless I'm specifically saying, like, I am speculating about part of their private persona, I'm not doing that. I have very little interest in guesswork at a stranger's internal landscape. There are questions that I have that, like, there are things that will come up where I'll say, I wonder this about this person. I wonder this about their perspective. I wonder this about the artist. But that doesn't mean that I'm saying that those things are the case. It doesn't mean that I'm saying that those experiences are true. And I just want to make that very, very clear, because, you know, I think it's my ethical responsibility as somebody who is a practicing therapist to make sure that I'm not inadvertently misleading anyone into saying that anything I'm stating is fact. This is all interpretation and it's all analysis. So let's make sure that we have a strong, like, critical read hat on as we engage with this. Real quickly, if you're one of my clients and you're still watching this, per usual, talk to me before you continue watching any of my content online of any sort that is not immediately related to clinical care. We should discuss that otherwise, especially if you're like 16. If you're one of my 15 to 20-year-olds, please, like, congratulations. You found me on the internet. Good job, kid. Goodbye. Bye. That's all. Okay, let's get to it. Let's start with let's start with railway. Railway. I have a hard time with R's. So we start with all this smoke. This part's kind of interesting because while this can be the beginning of the loop, I think it also could be a dream. Because he wakes up right there, right? So yeah, so far what we have is he has this like smoke effect, and he's afraid. He gets pushed back, and like I said, we think about this as the beginning of the loop, but the like him being dragged into the prison cell um by what's implied to be like a naked version of him, that's kind of interesting because it's not really part of the loop. So my suspicion is that he's dreaming. But at the very least, this is setting up confusion for us, and confusion is a really fundamental part of this whole video is an uncertainty. So he has this fear, he's running away, he kind of disappears and reappears in the smoke. He gets dragged into that prison cell by some version of him, but it's not really told which version. He wakes up. He's hungry. He's very focused. He thinks about the either maybe the former loop, the prisoners outside. He's thinking about something. He grabs his coat and now he's breaking out of the cell. And what you'll see as he's breaking out of the cell is that we're not really certain where the cell is. There's an implication that his cell is like a cell inside of the prison. But we never see the transition really. So it's like he breaks out of the cell and then he enters a floor of the prison, whether the prison is in a different location or the same location. Pretending to be a doctor, there's a pretense of it. Right, so there's the transition. Is he coming out of his prison from the basement? We don't really know. He does have this BDSM doctor bag where he thinks he's being sneaky. So he thinks he's being sneaky. He's not, but he thinks he is. He has this doctor's bag, which, yeah, very funny to me that people didn't immediately clock it as clearly being BDSM related. It is clearly BDSM related. We'll talk about the inherent eroticism of the vampire story. But he is sort of pretending to be this doctor. There's this pretense. And then there's this kind of chaotic back and forth, which might be remembering, it might be dreaming, it might be switching between versions of him. There's the sign that says an evil deed committed always returns to the person who committed it, and the other signs say some other things in some other languages, but it's essentially a statement about retribution, about karma. And then he switches, right? And there's that big moment of that switch right afterwards. The evil deed statement is sort of interesting because we don't really know what these inmates are here for. So while this is about him, the implication is that there's no there's no good in this story. And in some ways, that's what this sign is telling us, is that at no point in the story that we're about to witness is there like a hero. At the best, we have an anti-hero, but none of them are good guys, right? So he goes through, he starts killing these people. We'll get to the question mark, why I have that as a question mark. He's really hot for a little bit. There's a lot. A lot of it is him being erotic. Yeah, so he starts killing inmates, which is weird. And when we do a slowdown, we'll talk a little bit more about how weird it is. It's actually kind of unclear if he actually is killing them or not. What's interesting too is that the implication at the beginning is that he's hungry. That's why he's going after these inmates. But he only bites one of them. And he's a very messy eater, I suppose. So he starts killing inmates who were released by someone at some point, unclear whom or when or why. Is he the warden? Bites exactly like one. He subjugates them, probably like a vampire thrall esque. That's the implication, is that there's this vampire thrall happening over the inmates, and they'll listen to him. And they start doing things. They seem to be sort of lost in the same fog he is, but like they're breaking out of the prison through vampire thrall dance moves. Those are very bad lasers. Who are the guards? It's not a well set up prison, which we will get to. That's an important note. This is a poorly set up prison. There's this things happening, and then there's this massive scene change. Yeah, so he breaks out of prison, kind of. He breaks out of the building part with the inmates utilizing that vampire thrall. And there's that transition scene change where we don't really know what's happening. Again, a continual theme of this music video is the not really knowing how we're getting from one point to another point in the story. And what some of those transitions are actually telling us is happening. There's this sense of like euphoria in that transition, right? As he's like flying through the air with those ravens. Maybe that's the euphoria of bloodshed. Maybe that's the euphoria of feeding. Maybe that's the euphoria of freedom. Maybe that is still, if we're talking about a dream, maybe that's still dreaming. It is now daytime. And they're outside, right? It's now daytime. They're outside working to free him, I guess, from the fence, which is unclear. And what's also interesting is the back and forth between the outfits. We'll get into that too, but there's sort of this scene shift that keeps going back and forth. There's the one outfit where he has his coat on, where he's really not interacting with the inmates very much. And then there's the one outfit where he is just covered in viscera and blood, and he is fucking them up and implied just fucking them. Once again, there's inherent eroticism in the vampire story. So, like, all of the fetish implication is absolutely like part of this. That's part of it. Um, so he's and again, it's interesting because is he turning the inmates? That seems to be implied, but the purpose is really unclear. He seems to be using them to again help him break out of the fence, but mostly he seems to just be enjoying the sadism involved in tormenting them. Um, or at the very least, that's what he is compelled to be doing. And I do think that that outfit shift is really important in how he's engaging with the inmates first between those two different outfits, because it implies that there's very different mentalities and mindsets in how he's engaging with others. So he's trying to escape, and he manages to. Good job. Great job, Chad. Yeah, this train never sleeps. Brace yourself, take a seat. Don't you care about the casualties? So he manages to escape, and then once again we come back to the confusion, because he manages to escape and then he goes back into his cell, which again we don't know where it is. He pulls himself back into the cell, and sees this other version of him there. Importantly, when he goes back into the cell, he's not covered in blood anymore. And there are some ways that that's really obvious. We'll look at them closer when we do the slowdown version, but he's not covered in blood anymore. He's in a totally different situation than he was in the frame before. Something has happened. We don't know what. Maybe he doesn't know what. Is it important? We don't know. So he goes back into the cell. He's either cleaned himself all up or the entire thing has been a dream. And this is a part of vampire lore as well, is that vampires who are starving will go mad. So it's possible that he's never left this cell because he's been so hungry. He's just imagined leaving the cell and having that thirst quenched. Who knows? He sees himself in that clean white outfit. He experiences this. Maybe it's a set of memories. He starts to be hurt and beaten, potentially killed by himself in this moment. Yeah, so he gets killed by himself with his own cane. Brutal. So the thing that killed that white clad Chen killed him with was his own cane. It looked like. Interestingly, the White Chan afterwards, so again, we have this back and forth. Is he remembering something? Is he experiencing something? And so we have the back and forth between the scenes of the Vampyre Chan. Is he remembering the euphoria from 2 hours ago? Is he experiencing something? He's fleeing, but we have all of these scenes interspersed with him fleeing from the white clad Chan, who's chasing him somewhere. Either this is a massive prison or they're somewhere else. But interestingly, we then come back to White Chan after he's killed the vampire version of him with his own cane. He's sitting back at that same chair, just staring. We don't know. Is he actually doing the killing, or is he watching a different version of himself in the same outfit doing the killing? Is there a sense of amnesia happening? Like, once again, we have this really baffling, we just don't really know exactly what has gone on here. But he's sad, he's tired, he stares into the distance, with this vampire version of him behind another set of bars. How many prisons inside of prisons are there? Uncertain. At least a few. And then he drags the chair away, and as has been discussed in fandom spaces, whether you've seen it or not, the implication is that he drags the chair away to go to the show. So in the actual solo performances, he starts by dragging this chair out onto stage. And so that's the implication, is that the story goes from the music video to the stage and then back to the beginning of the music video, because he falls at the end of the stage. Then the music video restarts. All right. So there's a lot to unpack here. As a note, these are I have 6 pages of notes on this. This is not a script. These are my notes. So let's start. Like I said, we start. No, we're not going to quite start with a continuation of the textual, like the direct textual yet. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the other pieces of music that Chan has made that people often talk about as being similar. Because my argument is actually that this is pretty different than a lot of what Chan has done before. So we're just gonna have Drive going real gently in the background here. Here, let's move it down a little bit. So we talk about a few different songs as being similar to Railway, or at least that's what a lot of people talk about. And they talk about Connected, Drive, and Red Lights. Railway, in my opinion, is actually quite different from all of these for a few different reasons. One is what I will call the alien test, or the 5-year-old test, which is to say, or, well, 10-year-old test. 5-year-olds don't really know what's going on at all. But, which is to say, if you were to provide an alien or a 10-year-old with just the lyrics of a song, what would they think it's about? Now, Railway, Drive, and Connected all exist within this genre of song that's a pretty common genre. That's the genre of very thinly veiled sexual euphemisms. textually. However, if you had no context for a sexual euphemism, you would have no idea that they're about sex or about relationships, really. Maybe like connected a little bit, but overall, you look at the text, especially of Drive and Railway, and you're like, wow, you feel really passionately about trains, about driving, so like an alien who has no idea what a sexual euphemism is does not really look at the text of those songs and recognize it as a sexual euphemism. However, because we all are people with context, it's like the sexual euphemism is very, very thinly veiled. Red lights is different, and this is actually one of many reasons why they both Hyunjin and Chan did both a lot of like, who wrote red lights, but eventually it was stated like mostly it was Hyunjin, and then Chris translated it, and I fully believe that. I fully believe that actually. Uh, got rid of that because I didn't have another one lined up, honestly. Connected, I'm pretty sure doesn't have a music video. um, but Red Lights is very clearly about at least an intense relationship of some kind, likely sexual, and that's pretty obvious. It's pretty blatant by the text. Red lights sort of inverts the trope. I talk about this a little bit in one of my podcasts, and at some point I will do a red lights therapist reaction video and talk about it more. But red lights subverts the trope of thinly veiled euphemism for sex and is a tightly veiled euphemism for overwork. And that's one of a handful of reasons why I actually don't. It's really not very lyrically similar to Drive or Railway or Connected. So I'm not quite sure why everybody is really insistent that like it's Chris's song and it definitely wasn't Hyunjin's. Like they said it was, and it's stylistically very different, and the way that it portrays itself is very different. The difference with Railway, of course, is that Railway then took the music video and was like, okay, textually, if you just read the text of this song, sure, you could project a lot of interpretations onto it, but from a pure textual analysis only, there's not much to it besides a thinly veiled euphemism for sex. And if you did not understand sexual euphemisms, if you were an alien or a 10-year-old, it's a song about laying pipe. I hate myself. So that's the textual. And then we have the textual of the music video. Now, the director, over Kim. So give me a moment. Okay, this is pretty difficult to see, but the studio behind the creative direction for Railway, which is Nove, posted these images of the inspiration behind Railway thematically. So this is still sort of within our textual. It's like a little extra textual, but this is our inspiration behind the textual analysis. So what they have is they have Dracula, Bad Blood, and Karma. They go a little bit more into the specifics of those things. Um, Unfortunately, I definitely saw a translation at some point, and I don't remember exactly what it said. Um, but if you go to the Nove Creative Studio Instagram, they did post images of those things, and we'll kind of recall what was said about the statement of uh, evil deeds committed will return to the owner, bad blood, Dracula. That's all pretty straightforward, right? So this is the inspiration. Makes a lot of sense. Which means that we're gonna have to talk about the vampire story. Um, the other analysis direction. So this is another one of the ways that red lights really differs from railway. In some ways, they are much closer than driver connected and railway are, in at least the creative direction around the way the music videos are set. So, we see a much more in-depth story in the music videos than is told through the text of the music itself. Um, One of the big differences, in my opinion, is that Railway, I think, runs several different paths of analysis, kind of like a rail line. It's okay, I don't like myself for that joke either. Um, you can sort of take a very textual analysis, go down the path of the vampire story, go down just like really straightforward analysis of it. There's an analysis that you can take that is the analysis of the homage to DPR Ian, which obviously we'll talk about quite in depth. There's an analysis that you can take from an eroticism perspective, and I do think that that's pretty aligned with the vampire story. And they are very connected, like doing the analysis of the eroticism and the analysis of the vampire story are very connected. Doing the analysis of the vampire story and the analysis of the DPR Ian homage are somewhat connected because the vampire story itself kind of is an homage to prior vampire stories. Um, Red lights, I think if you try to remove analyzing the eroticism, you lose massive parts of the analysis. Like, you really, really lose some really integral parts. And likewise, if you remove the analysis of the obsession with work and the obsession with trying to make yourself appealing, you really, really lose some really important parts. Red lights, everything is very, very tangled. I think it's very difficult to take a single pathway analysis of red lights. Whereas railway, I think you can come at it from a variety of different directions, and you're going to lose some parts, obviously, but you're not going to lose just like fucking everything if you really focus on one part of the analysis. So we're going to sort of go first the extra textual of the vampire story. Then we will go and talk about DPR Ian a little bit. Then I'm going to talk about dissociation a whole bunch because it's difficult to talk about doing an homage to DPR Ian without talking about dissociation. We'll take that clinical route. Intertwined in all of this is going to be a little bit of the eroticism part, but that is also part of the vampire story. And then we'll pull it all together, sort of see what we can take from all of it, and then go back through the music video and address some of these very, very open questions with some possible answers, and frankly, a lot more questions, which is very fun. I love answering questions with more questions. It's a very me way of doing things. As a note, most of this part you don't really need to watch the screen for. I don't have an interesting PowerPoint presentation. I don't, this isn't, I usually run a podcast. That's mostly what this is. Except it's a YouTube video. So you can meander off and just listen for a while. So the vampire story. This is a lot of fun for me because this involves talking about the greatest disaster bisexual road trip of potentially all time. At least the most significant disaster bisexual road trip that has happened for human history in the last like 300 years. I don't know that much about other bisexual disaster road trips, so I don't know what are top 5 most influential disaster bisexual road trips throughout history are. But this one is certainly within the top 10 of most significant for like society disaster bisexual road trips. And that is uh the experience that resulted in both Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and The Vampire. A lot of people don't realize that the same writing competition, which was a very informal competition that resulted in Frankenstein, also resulted in The Vampire. Now, the story of vampires, right? Vampires are a mythology that has been around for a very, very long time. Um, there are folklores about vampires and things like vampires hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, possibly thousands of years. It's a very old story. However, The Vampire, written by John William Polidori. I always want to say Polidori, but it's not. John William Polidori. Uh, Sometimes miscredited to Byron for reasons. Was the first time really that we at least have in as part of like our written record, influential written record, that the story of the vampire was that of a seducer. Um, was that where the vampire was sort of seen as an enigmatic figure, was seen as someone influential, was seen as someone who was a playboy, right? So this is very influential for the way that the vampire story would come about ever since. Uh, the vampire thrall that is so tied with vampiric eroticism came about then, and the relationship between vampirism and sex really started to come about then. So this has a huge impact. Now, I would make the argument personally, and this is kind of in general a difficult argument to make. We call it the bisexual disaster road trip, and obviously that's a little bit facetious, but there's a lot of evidence that a lot of the people involved in this, group bonding experience were some variety of queer. Byron, we know, was bisexual of some kind. Um, And there's decent evidence that the others were not exactly heteronormative. They all certainly fucked a lot. To be the type of person whose epitaph would become mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Alas, I'm far too emotionally stable for that. Unlike Byron, who was a dick. And also, whose primary organ was his dick. So, anyway, the vampire. So the vampire really starts to build the vampire genre. This is the first time that we start to see it as genre fiction. Soon after the vampire, we see Carmilla. And this is somewhat important. So the story of the vampire, like the vampire stories, the genre, throughout much of Regency era and, you know, kind of all through the 1800s and much of the 1900s, and we still even see this a bit today, the vampire story is usually one which was meant, like, it was meant to be a puritanical story. It was meant to bemoan the problems of being sexual, or at least that's what it turned into. The vampire itself was not necessarily that, and had some homoerotic undertones, much like every single fucking thing these bisexual assholes made, right? The, like, homoeroticism is as much part of the vampire genre as eroticism is. And it's really not helpful to sort of say that, like, vampire stories exist without eroticism and homoeroticism, because they're just based in both. And yes, over time they turn into a warning about these forms of eroticism, about sex, about especially sex with the same gender, you know. However, early on, that's not necessarily always the case, and it's not always the case throughout, but it's not necessarily the case with the vampire, and it's also not the case with Carmilla. Now, Carmilla is a very famous Gothic novella that is about lesbian vampires. It came out 25 some odd years before Dracula. And the main vampire is a woman who is attracted to other women. It is a lesbian love story. Unlike much of the vampire fiction that sort of came about, and much of the lesbian fiction that would come about, despite being written by ostensibly a man, it really was like a lovely love story. It really was not a condemnation of lesbianism. So again, this is why we say that a lot of our early vampire work is both erotic and homoerotic. Dracula comes out in the late 1900s. It is meant to be, or late 1800s, apologies. So the vampire came out early 1800s. Carmilla comes out mid to late 1800s. Dracula comes out right at the end of the 1800s. It's based on the vampire, and obviously hugely popular, right? Becomes incredibly influential, and many, you know, there's a lot of archetypes based on Dracula. So when we're looking at Dracula's inspiration, we acknowledge that there is something inherently erotic. We acknowledge that there's also something that's going to be a little homoerotic about it. This is just part of our understanding of the genre. So again, like, yeah, 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 of course my dude is walking around with a. When the stylist said, yeah, I don't, if you don't know, the stylist, one of the stylists, one of the costumers for Railway, went on Instagram and was like, yeah, we went to a sex store for some of the things with this bag. It was a custom made bag. The handcuffs on it are 50 Shades of Grey handcuffs, which is incredibly upsetting. It's incredibly upsetting. Please do not use. There's much better BDSM erotica out there, I assure you. I know this factually. There is better BDSM erotica on AO3. Like, please do not. Anyway. Yeah, for anybody who has been involved in kink scenes, it was very clear immediately that the like doctor's bag that he had looked a lot like a a sex bag. Like it was very erotic, and much of the whole thing is very erotic. Obviously, a lot of people have been talking about you know, the how hot seeing whatever Chan push people against walls and spit blood in their mouth and literally step on them. People people say wild things on the internet. But yeah, that's you're literally biting someone's neck. Like it's pretty erotic. That's how it works. And it's definitely filmed to be that way. I think there is some really valid reasons. You know, I kind of jokingly said it in the watch through, but I mean it that I think there are some valid readings where you could even just read the music video itself as sexual euphemisms. Um, you could do an entire interpretation of the music video just being about someone's relationship to sex. Absolutely. And I think it's totally fair to be curious about, you know, the artists, whether that's Chan or the directors or whomever, relationship to sex and sexuality um, because of that. So, Dracula, and that's the sort of high level vampiric story. Now, there's a number of references to different types of vampires, different types of vampire stories within the, you know, whole music video. I think that the way that like his claws are shown, things like that, speaks very, you know, Nosferatu, which I have not seen the recent one, but at the very least the original. Uh, I will admit that I don't know quite enough about vampire genre movies and shows to pick up all the references. You know, the big reference that I don't even know if it was a purposeful reference. I don't know. I've watched a lot of Buffy, and the inmates look so much like so in the episode Hush, the gentlemen have their little like minions, which I think are technically called something, but I don't remember what. And the way the inmates are like costumed and dressed and moved, and especially Chan on the Segway, because when he's like commanding them when he has their thrall over them. If you watch the behind the scenes, he's on this Segway. And the gentlemen just like float and hover also. And I watched that and I was like, am I aging myself? I, like, by immediately just being like, oh, that's Buffy. It might be total bullshit, but that's what I first thought of. I suspect there's a number of direct references, though, that I just don't know because I don't know that much about the whole genre, to be honest. So that's some of our extra textual, the vampire story. Now we're going to talk about DPR Ian. And I am going to put on, in the background, I'm just going to play some of DPR Ian's music videos in the background while we're chatting. Okay, so if you don't already know, Chris has talked a few different times about being a fan of DPR Ian. DPR Ian, if you don't know of him, you should be. And shout out to, I did not actually ask them if they're okay with me crediting them directly, so I should follow up about that and post it in the doobly-doo. And yes, I'm aging myself now by calling it a doobly-doo, but it's been a doobly-doo since I was 16, and it's still a doobly-doo now, so go fuck yourself. I'll link in the doobly-doo if they do want me to credit them directly, but somebody on Threads was talking about specifically how it seemed, how many references it looked like there were between Railway and some of DPR Ian's music videos. And I was like, thanks for pointing this out. I didn't even really know DPR Ian. I do know DPR Ian now. Like I had sort of heard of DPR Ian, but I hadn't really explored much. Incredible musician, incredible artist in general. And so shout out to them for bringing this up. As they did, and I was reading through it and I was learning more about DPR Ian, I thought to myself, like, actually dissociation is a really interesting take here. It's really interesting to be thinking about dissociation, and is a really interesting way also to look at some of the confusion that happens in the Railway music video. But bringing it back to DPR Ian, Chris has talked in Cham's room several times about DPR Ian. He has reacted to several of DPR Ian's music videos. He's a DPR Ian fan, and DPR Ian also comes from Australia, so like there's a little bit of emotional connection there. Has been in the K-pop game for a very long time, and now runs his own company producing music for a few different artists. Even as you're watching the video here to the side, which is the video for Saint, you can see some of the overlap. I think some of the most distinct overlap, and it does seem to be a purposeful homage. I think that Limbo seems to be the main homage that we're looking at, but we can see different elements in Railway that are very similar to elements in So Beautiful, elements of Don't Go Insane, Limbo, elements here of Saint. There's, for instance, the way the color palette works. There's the contrast, the red, at like here specifically in Saint, especially the way the colors are presented. There's a lot of different things of, DPR Ian uses a lot of flashing lights, that sort of lightning formation, which when I talk about hallucination in part 2, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more because Stray Kids uses it a lot in general. And I mean, obviously it's a really popular motif
the lightning motif, but it's something that DPR Ian uses a ton of. So Limbo is playing here, and you can see, it has similar qualities of the like signs here, like the quotations of various things. So, gosh, it's so good. You can see also like the suit here, the piles of people that are sort of this masked quality, uh, the chaos. They have the gloves with the uh fingers on them, the claws, fingers, yeah, they have fingers, the claws on them. So there seems to be quite a bit of homage work here. What DPR Ian primarily is doing, gosh, even the his like outfit, you see that neck part that is holding up the tie, that looks so much like Chan's too, which is why I say, like, I think it is a purposeful homage. There's too many coincidences for it to not be. Um, we have so what DPR Ian does is he has dissociative identity disorders, which clinically, in affirming clinician practice, we will refer to as structured dissociation. Um, and what happens is that when he's filming his music videos, which he edits himself and does a lot of the direction for himself and things like that, he will switch sometimes during filming. And some of his music is about some of his experiences, both being a system, having structured dissociation, as well as his experiences being bipolar. And so a lot of his music videos are very chaotic, are very sort of confusing. There's a lot of flashing. There's a lot of changes in the actual like the filters on different parts of it, the way that different effects work. And some of that is meant to represent or show the audience when he is switching, when Mito is presenting, uh, etc. So I'm just getting distracted watching. I should. So now what's playing is Don't Go Insane, which we see more of sort of the undeath, the switching. So what we just saw right there is a visual representation of switching. Some of the heterochromia, oh, actually, no, this one doesn't have heterochromia. It just has different eyes between different personas. But some of the other videos have heterochromia, especially So Beautiful has a lot of it. So Beautiful also uh, really sort of goes into, there's some amount of beauty of disability that I think is also represented in Railway in some ways, that the things that are evil about the character that Chris is playing in Railway are not actually the things that are disabling, or not the disabilities. In fact, the disability itself is really portrayed as beautiful and erotic. It's instead the behavior that is being exhibited. And so I think there's some overlap between the beauty of disability between So Beautiful and Railway. There's this idea of like, I'm not that crazy is something that DPR Ian says in So Beautiful. And of course, Don't Go Insane has a lot of the back and forth between I'm insane, I'm sane over and over. This obviously also has a lot of references to uh, movies and film, like the Don't Go Insane has a lot of homages itself, totally fair and valid. But you see this sort of like masked thing that's happening where you can't really tell what these people are meant to represent per se. They're because they're, you know, their background, but they're like main characters who are background characters. And there's something very similar that happens in Railway also. Some other similarities, so beautiful. At one point, lyrically, he says, "Before I change again, remind me of the time when I still remembered." That we're going to talk about more with dissociation in general as well. But I think that, as I said, when you look at Railway, there's some things that are really confusing about whether they're, is he dreaming or is he remembering something? Is he experiencing some amnesia? Does he know that he's living through the same thing over and over again or not? It's not super clear. So I see some of that in there as well. Saint, I think there's like a lot of lyrical overlap. If you go read the lyrics for Saint, there's a lot of lyrical overlap. There's a lot of visual overlap. There's the like costuming overlap as well. The way that some of the back tattoos are like working. I think about the back tattoos and like Chan's stage tattoos. That's very interesting to me. You also see multiple versions of that main character, and of course, again, that's something that you see throughout all of DPR Ian's work. Okay, partway through that video, I decided that I wanted to, before talking more about dissociation, talk about some other extra textual things a little bit first. Because I want to be able to bring them up when talking about dissociation, before I totally sidetrack us with like clinical academic stuff. So that's why just suddenly the video disappeared, is because I stared into the distance for a long several moments, and I'm going to edit that part out. So there are some extra textual things that Chan has said, whether about Railway itself, which he said very little about Railway itself, to be clear, on purpose. He was like, you can figure it out. So I hope Chris isn't watching this. But if you are, I hope you're happy, Christopher. Here's some extra textual things that he's said in general that I want to bring up before talking about dissociation, some of the clinical stuff. So one of them is in the making of the Railway behind the scenes. Okay, so at 1628, we're gonna just watch for like 30 seconds or so about what he says here.
너무 외로울 것 같아. 어차피 나만 계속 살고 다른 사람들 다 죽고 사람들한테 쉽게 정을 줄 수 없을 것 같아. 정 주면은 어차피 결국 떠나가는 걸 알고 하니까 뭐 결국 엄청 외로울 것 같아요. 뭔가 내 연습생 얘기랑 비슷한 것 같아. 오, 아하, 몸보다 마음이 늙어가는 게.
Yeah, okay. So it's just like a cute little interview, but it's some important context. Okay, and then the other big piece of context that sort of is similar is the Daebak show at 12:20 here.
Oh,
or
no.
12:25
yes.
What was the hardest part?
Seeing people come and go.
Yeah.
So like
Right.
you get close to people, but then they end up not making it, or
Right.
then they end up debuting before I do. There was one time, besides me, everyone got cut,
Oh wow.
and I was like,
Oh,
wow, what is happening here? And then I fell into like a really deep depression. No, I wouldn't say it's depression, but I was like, I'm
That phase.
not gonna be friends with anyone. I do not want to experience this pain again. I'm not gonna be friends with. That's why I was always so dark, like
yeah.
because for them it's like he's so scary. Like, 7 years. How do I approach him?
Grandmaster.
Like literally, like
it was a rank.
yeah.
So what was your first impression?
Yeah, so that's all important and relevant. And we'll sort of get into why, but we're going to talk about attachment issues along with dissociation. And he said similar things in other places. So, for instance, there's the concert footage. I think it's concert footage. It's pretty old footage, but he's talking about his like apologizing to Felix for being hard on him, and sort of how hard it was to be gentle. I think that also his One Kid's Room interview has a lot of extra textual stuff that I think is useful for the reading of Railway as well, when he's talking about, all of the stuff he does to try to feel like he's doing a good job. And he's said before, I don't remember where, but I do know that he said before that he really doesn't like feeling out of control. He really likes feeling like he's in control of situations. So we're going to put all that extra textual information to the side for a moment. And we're going to pivot to dissociation, and we're going to come back to it. So let's talk about dissociation from a clinical lens. Because I do think that's actually a really interesting angle to take on the analysis of Railway. And it brought up a lot of questions for me, actually. But just to talk about what it is, what is, DID, if we're talking about homages to DPR Ian, what is structured dissociation, what sorts of experiences result in atypical dissociation, we'll say, and what are different, important terms, words, and how might they be represented? How might dissociation be represented artistically? So dissociation is very poorly understood by people generally, I've found. Most people's experience with understanding dissociative identity disorder, what is now referred to as dissociative identity disorder, and been referred to as that for a very long time by any country that uses the DSM. I don't know in the ICD I don't know the ICD as well as the DSM, I'm going to be honest. It used to be referred to as multiple personality disorder. A lot of the knowledge people have about it are shows that represent it very poorly, like United States of Terra, Marcella, a lot that are a lot worse. We won't get into some of the worst explorations of it. I'm sure that there are some that are decent, but I don't know them. So the general understanding of the most extreme versions of dissociation is very poor. I'd say that the general understanding of dissociation itself also very poor. So dissociation is a normal human experience that everybody has. Every single person experiences dissociation. I have a couple times had clients who experience very little dissociation, and it's actually a problem. Most typically, you're going to experience dissociation in rote tasks that you don't need to focus on to do anymore. Maybe you dissociate while you're washing the dishes. If you ever have done what sometimes is referred to as autopiloting, so let's say you're driving and you realize that you drove to work instead of driving to wherever you meant to drive to. That's, you dissociated your way out of it. Dissociation is actually pretty common when driving in fairly safe circumstances. Dissociation, very similar to daydreaming. And daydreaming is something that, like, we all need to do. Our brains want to daydream for, like, between 40 and 60% of our waking lives. It's really good for us, and it's really bad for our brains to not have the opportunity to daydream. That's a whole different rant. Dissociation is a normal part of human experience. Every single person has experienced it. And it's like there is healthy dissociation. When we're talking about dissociation that is problematic is when it exists as an avoidance mechanism. I need a cough drop. I've been talking so hard. So dissociation, sort of the, I guess, unhealthy, or if I were a CBT therapist, which I am not, I mean, I guess sometimes I kind of am, maladaptive. I really hate the term maladaptive. I will fight behavioral therapies about the word maladaptive. But dissociation that is a coping mechanism breaks down into what we call derealization and depersonalization. And sort of our, like, lowest level dissociative disorder, because there's a number of dissociative disorders, is DRDP, derealization, depersonalization disorder. Now, derealization is the feeling that the things around you aren't real, maybe. Maybe things look like they're kind of in a fog. Maybe you kind of spiral into an existential crisis about, like, is the chair real? I don't know. Maybe there's this sort of feeling like being in a dream. So derealization is the sense that things external to you aren't real. Depersonalization is what is commonly, I think the common metaphor is like feeling like you're watching yourself as though you're in a movie. Or it's sort of the sense that, like, your body is not under your control. That there's someone else or something else that is controlling your body. That, like, you're not the primary individual in charge of what your body is doing. It usually comes at a strong somatic loss. So that's to say that there's a lot of dissociating from the feelings in your body. So a lot of people who depersonalize will feel a lot less pain. A lot of people who depersonalize will have a harder time knowing what their emotions are, because emotions are just the physical stimuli, right? Every single emotion you feel in your body somehow, if you don't have a sense of your body or what your body signals are telling you, you don't really know what you're feeling. You're probably not feeling much emotionally because you don't feel your body, and there's not like the way you know you're feeling things is because there's somatic signals, right? If you're happy, maybe you are breathing harder, maybe your eyes are wider, maybe you feel more of a head rush. If you're excited, maybe you have like some of those anxious butterflies, but they're, cognitively you're thinking through wonderful things while experiencing those sort of anxious butterflies. If you're stressed, maybe you are feeling nauseated. If you're sad, maybe you feel like your eyes burning or you're breathing harder. If you're angry, maybe you're clenching, right? So we notice most of our emotions primarily somatically. There are some cognitive symptoms of different emotions, but a lot of them are somatic. So depersonalization often comes with a somatic loss. Dissociative identity disorder and often OSDD, other specified dissociative disorder, sometimes DPDR, are usually primarily depersonalization related, though often there is derealization involved as well. What happens with structured dissociation? And that's what we generally like to refer to in more affirming therapy practice. So I work with a number of clients with various dissociative disorders or some level of structured dissociation, right? Because again, this is all on a spectrum that everybody experiences. So everybody experiences dissociation, and sometimes dissociation becomes a coping mechanism for difficult things, whether it's just negative emotions or not emotions that feel bad, unpleasant emotions, whether it's just unpleasant emotions or trauma. It's all just a spectrum of things that we all experience. So that's the case for structured dissociation, for even our most extreme versions of structured dissociation. So people who experience a lot of structured dissociation and have what we would refer to as alters are referred to as systems or multiples, whereas those of us who don't are referred to as singlets. I work with a number of clients who either experience structured dissociation on a significant degree or are multiples or systems. This is largely because I work with a lot of autistic clients, and there does seem to be a decent correlation between autism and structured dissociation. The science is still iffy, but like large scale anecdotally, this does seem to be the case. I have a lot of theories about it. They're irrelevant to this conversation. But I do have vaguely specialize kind of accidentally in this. When you work with a lot of autistic clients, and primarily autistic clients, you sort of have to learn to specialize in this because it's not uncommon to have structured dissociation when you're autistic, and it's not uncommon to have a lot of it either. So what happens is that people, as they're growing up, are meant to build a sense of self. You're developmentally, we're creating a sense of self between when we're born and really around the ages of like 20 to 25. All of that is starting to build a sense of self, especially when we're really young, though. But when there are things that disrupt that, it can result in people's personalities not necessarily fusing in that way. and creating a singular sense of self. A lot of people assume that structured dissociation comes about like you have a singular sense of self and then it splits. That's what can happen later in life, but usually um structured dissociation starts when you're quite young. Dissociation becomes a primary coping mechanism for difficult situations. Perhaps there's a lot of attachment injury, perhaps there's a lot of trauma, perhaps there's significant abuse, right? Things that will result in complex PTSD. Perhaps you are always overstimulated or melting down or overwhelmed. For whatever reason, dissociation becomes a primary coping mechanism of dealing with how difficult the world is when you're very, very young. And what this means is that people don't start integrating into a singular personality. You're not born with a singular personality. We really don't have any reason to believe that. You develop a singular sense of self over time. Not everybody does. In fact, I would argue, honestly, I'd argue that like most people really struggle building a sense of self. It's a lot of what we do as therapists. But when dissociation and depersonalization specifically become a primary coping mechanism, all of those different personality traits, maybe it's just 2, maybe it's 50, start to sort of categorize and separate themselves. And eventually, that separation becomes its own coping mechanism as well. And that's what a like dissociative split is, what creates what we refer to as alters. Sometimes people will experience, there'll be what we refer to as median systems. So maybe there is a primary identity or a primary alter or a, however that person wants to refer to whoever is fronting. And they're like always fronting, but there are multiple what we refer to as headmates. So that sort of, and median system is a terminology that's still being explored within the community. And I'm really not the best person to talk on all of that because I am a singlet myself. Just one that has experienced a lot of dissociation in my life, but mostly I experience more derealization in my past than depersonalization. In addition, so we don't always diagnose all the way to like DID, right? That's pretty far on that spectrum. And certainly I have clients, there are people who will get, even within that, like that's a huge spectrum. There are people who will have 100 alters, and I'm not exaggerating, and that's not uncommon, especially if they've experienced a lot of trauma in life. There are people who will have 3 or 4. I think there's some research that looks at some averages. I think average like sits at like between 6 and 10 or something, but I don't have strong recollection of that data off the top of my head. Now, one big thing that can happen with dissociation is what we call dissociative fugue. And this can happen, dissociative fugue is technically its own diagnosis. This can happen kind of regardless of whether there is a dissociative disorder. It can happen at any level of dissociation. But dissociative fugue is when somebody enters dissociation and it causes issues in cognitive functioning, often resulting in temporary or potentially long-term amnesia. People who are much higher on structured dissociation spectrums tend to have a lot more amnesia. Not everybody who has structured dissociation has any amnesia, even. But a lot of people who have structured dissociation, and technically for a DID diagnosis, amnesia is required. A lot of people will have significant amnesia. And what will happen is as they get more in touch with alters, are also able to heal more and are able to deal with their trauma, are able to be in better circumstances, some of that amnesia will be recovered. It's not necessarily permanent amnesia. It's sort of locking memories away in different alter headspaces. So when I've worked with clients who have amnesia, we actually have to work pretty hard at trying to get and listen. There are a lot of clinicians who will tell me that this is the wrong way to treat dissociations, and I don't give a fuck about that. Supposedly, quote unquote, treating dissociative disorders, you're only supposed to speak to the like core personality and blah 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 blah. It's like not affirming. It's not good practice. Clinicians tend to emphasize what we call fusion over integration, like functional integration. And a lot of systems prefer functional integration over fusion. We're not necessarily trying to fuse all of the alters back together into a singular personality at this point. We're trying to help the individual and the system learn how to manage themselves well enough to be able to have the right person fronting to deal with any situation, ideally without splitting and without increasing problematic dissociation. So when I have clients with a lot of amnesia, sometimes what we need to do is try to figure out how we get different alters to be the one working with me, right? How do we have this alter be the one in session? Because whoever it is that I'm normally working with doesn't have access to those memories. But those memories are also what's creating the neural pathways and like reinforcing the neural pathways that are creating difficult beliefs. And it's like this whole messy thing. When somebody has a whole bunch of trauma, sometimes like different traumas exist in different headmates or in different alters or whichever terminology that individual is using. And you have to sort of pick one. And sometimes it's a roll of a die of what we're working on today. And that's just like, that is the nature of really intense dissociative fugue. For people who aren't at that level of amnesia or whose amnesia is different, what we might see more of is I'm dissociating, and like if somebody reminds me of a meeting that I had, I might remember that it existed, but I'm not going to be able to off the top of my head. I don't know whether something happened yesterday or 3 weeks ago or 2 months ago. And like to a much different level than like ADHD time blindness, we're looking at pure like, I really don't know. Just I don't remember well enough. A lot of times with ADHD, when there isn't dissociation, you're looking more at like if somebody says like, oh yeah, you left your keys here, you now have the memory of leaving your keys there, you just couldn't remember it beforehand. Dissociation and ADHD also go hand in hand though, right? Because what will happen is that you start to dissociate, the ADHD goes, yeah, I can help with that. Let's just forget everything. And the dissociation goes, cool, I love that for me. And then they, hold hands and skip off into the distance with each other. So that's our understanding of dissociation. We can come back to railway now. If you've listened to my podcast, you know that I go off on tangents. But they always become relevant eventually. Actually, I will say one other thing. Like I said, dissociation, a lot of times, like really high levels of dissociation or a lot of structured dissociation, usually is coming from trauma. Ongoing, significant trauma, including attachment injuries. When I say attachment injuries, what I'm talking about is things that disrupt our individual attachment styles, that create more insecure attachment styles, that impact our methods of, in a secure and healthy way, connect to other people and ourselves. Like, for instance, never being able to grow close with anyone ever because you're afraid they'll all leave you instantaneously and you'll be by yourself indefinitely. You know, like that. Let's say a client came to me like, hey, I made railway. It was me. I'm the problem, it's me. I have a series of questions that I would probably ask. And again, I don't want to make assumptions, but I do have questions. I've written some of them down. So, my first therapist question. 1. Becoming Dracula and being Dracula, being this vampire, and an imprisoned vampire at that. Is it Christopher's punishment? Or is he being punished inherently for being Dracula? Like, what came first? Because there's clearly a punishment happening. This is clearly a horrible punishment too. This is torture. This is absolutely torturous. This constant cycle. What is he being punished for? Is he being turned what was being turned into a vampire? Punishment for something he had done. Is he being punished for what he has been doing as a vampire, despite not being given appropriate accommodations of like food? This seems pretty straightforward. You're gonna turn someone into a vampire, you gotta feed them somehow. Or is he just being punished for existing? So, what are you being punished for? 2. Who are the victims? Who are those inmates? I've seen a lot of theories about who the inmates are. But none of them have been my theory. Not yet. I'm sure that other people have come up with this theory. I'm sure it's not just mine. I just haven't seen it yet. I've seen some people say that it's stay. I don't think that's the case. I think that's projection. I think that's people being kind of horny and wishing. I've seen some people saying that it's like staff. My guess is that it would be himself. I think that, and part of the reason why I brought up dissociation and why, even if we're not just talking about it from an homage to DPR Ian perspective, why I think that it is relevant regardless is that we see multiple versions of Chan. And I think that that's honestly kind of interesting, again, extra textually about Chan himself. You know, you'll note that I keep going between calling him Chan and calling him Chris. And that's because it's been sort of unclear to me which one he wants to go by. Um, but like there's that joke in fandom that there's Chris, Chan, and Channy. That Chan always has to deal with Christopher's decisions. And, you know, even to the extent of like what persona is he presenting at any point in time, it is interesting that there are these very divergent personas that he has. And within Railway, originally I had thought to myself, there are 3 to 4 versions of Chan within the Railway art. Minimum of 3, right? There's the Vampyre, there's the Chan and White, and there's the stage Chan. There's the real life version. But there's a distinct possibility that all of those inmates are also representing Chan. And what I suspect about the setting itself is that it is a representation of kind of his inner world. It's his own prison. And that would sort of be actually our 4th Chan is the actual human, right? Because there's this the meta Chris, the real one who exists overall and has this stage persona and then breaks down these 2 antagonistic versions of himself. But I could see, if we were to take the metaphor and I ask people all the time, like, what does your inner world look like? Especially systems, which I'm in no way, shape, or form at any point saying that Chris is, to be super clear. But like, especially systems, I will ask them what their inner world looks like. Like, what do all the rooms for all of your headmates look like? What does the house look like? But I'll ask this of a lot of clients who have a difficult time sort of understanding their inner selves. And I think there is a read on Railway in which the inner world is a prison, which is a horrifying way to treat yourself. Like, that's a horrifying way to treat yourself. If someone's like, yeah, what does your like inner, what's your mind palace? It's like a prison. Like, okay, buddy. Okay, pal. Sure. A prison. Cool, 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 cool. But if that's your inner world, then aren't all the inmates parts of you? Isn't all of this a little piece of you? And is this a metaphor for subjugating yourself? Is White Chan, it's weird to call him White Chan, but is that last Chan that we see, is he punishing, like, what to the question of what are you being punished for? Are you being punished for subjugating yourself? Like, is this you punishing yourself for punishing yourself? What is that? That feels like maybe a little bit of circular reasoning. But yeah, if we're gonna bring in that extra textual piece of control and wanting a sense of control, over control is a really, like, that's an entire different framing of how to conceptualize clinical work, is people who are over controlled or under controlled. When I was working in eating disorders, we talk about this a lot. But over control results in a lot of like self-flagellation, and then self-flagellating yourself for self-flagellating yourself. Like, it's a gnarly place to be in. So who are the victims? Are the victims other people? Or are the victims all yourself? Is it both? Next question. Can I read my own handwriting? This is going to be an experience for me trying to. What is the train? The integrity? That would not be right. Enolatry? Industry. That probably says industry. Why did I spell it INDYTRY? What is the train? This train never stops. What's the train? There are no trains in the music video. There is a rail line. Oh, and by the way, I did caveat, total side note. I did search the history of rail lines, of like rail, to see if there were any interesting like overlaps between. There weren't. I mean, maybe there are and I missed them, but no interesting history of rail analysis to be done, as far as I can tell. Anyway, what is the train? This train never sleeps. Is it the industry? Is it the band? Is it himself? Is it his mind? Is it his feelings? Yeah, what's the train? I don't have much else to say about that, but like, could be talking about the industry. You know, the train never sleeps, the train never stops. We're gonna keep going forever, and nothing's ever gonna change. Could be the band, and that would sort of align with some of the other music they've made, but maybe in a more sort of depressing take of like, we don't know how to. Is it just himself? Like, no matter what I do, I cannot stop. I cannot cease. I cannot uh like make this end. So I might as well enjoy it, because what the fuck else am I supposed to do? Or yeah, it's potentially referring, it could, again, from the perspective of, if we're looking at an inner world, maybe his own mind or his own emotionality. Have you ever felt trapped by your own mind, and how frequently? Most people at some point will feel trapped by their own mind. That's it's pretty common, especially for those of us who chronically overthink and might like speak at a screen about a single music video for 2 hours and 10 minutes. But for some of us who do that, we might feel liberated by our own mind. So, you know, we're looking at this prison. And I think especially when we're thinking about karma. And I haven't talked much about the bad blood theming. It seems pretty straightforward to me, but um looking at that kind of sense of karma and the poisoning the well, sort of, that you might think about with bad blood, and you have this prison and you have this bondage gear, like, is there a reference to feeling trapped by your own mind? Is there a reference to holding yourself hostage? Is there something pleasurable about holding yourself hostage sometimes? Is it only painful? Or is there something that, like, part of you kind of gets off on that? You know, whether, like, literally sexually, but more like the pride in having that control, the pride in, um, yeah, I can handle this all so well, you know? We then get to the next parts of my questions, which would be, have you ever made anything similar? Have you, what are other pieces of art? And this is some of the extra textual information as well. I was really curious about this. Now, I have a bit of a project that I've been doing of organizing Stray Kids songs. Like, I have their entire discography, and I've been slowly but surely organizing it by a combination of the vibe of the music itself plus the actual content of the songs. So, like, I call it Stray Kids, but without the emotional whiplash. And it goes a little weird because they have a whole bunch of songs that sound similar to other songs but have very different thematic content. Anyway, this is a whole different rant. I'm reining myself back in. But since I've been doing that, I was thinking a little bit about, like, what other songs make me think about dissociation, make me think about attachment issues, make me think about control issues, make me think about, like, what are some of the reasons why Chan might be so attracted to, like, music by DPR Ian and folks like that, like things that are talking so much about mental health and wellness. And I just kind of want to put these out there. Um, Obviously, side effects. Uh, like I think that's pretty obvious, like some of the overlap between um side effects and this very, like, personally antagonistic music that's being made with Railway. Uh Maze of Memories, Awaken, Insomnia, all of those make me think a lot about amnesia, about dissociation, about maybe even psychosis a little bit, which again is something that's, like, really stigmatized in really silly ways because it's also a pretty normal experience. When I was working a lot when I was working in community mental health, you work a lot with people who are experiencing some type of psychosis, and also a lot with, like, schizophrenia and similar types of experiences. And I remember my supervisor did a training for us and said something that has just she told me a few things a few times that really stuck with me. And one of the things was, all of us experience delusions. And that is absolutely true. Every single one of us experience delusions. Just some of those delusions are accepted by society and some of them aren't. Some of those delusions are totally disabling, some of them are quite disabling, some of them aren't disabling. Uh, Most clients who I work with, you know, we could say that a lot of the really painful, unhelpful beliefs that people have are related to delusions. It's very, very normal. So, psychosis, super normal, happens to a lot of people, usually temporarily. But, you know, those songs make me think about experiences like that. And then, like, phobia and night and falling up also have some things that make me think a lot about control, a lot about fear, a lot about restraint, um, a lot about being out of control, right? So, and there are other songs as well that have other overlaps and other things that I think about, but those were some of the ones that really stuck out to me. With all of that, I do believe that I have gone over the important textual and extra textual context. So I'm going to pull back up Railway in just a moment, and we're going to go through it at obscenely slow speeds. Trust me, you don't want the reality of me putting on the volume to go through this at the slowest possible speed that I can. Okay, so first, so we have this heterochromia, and again, I have this written because I do think that it is an interesting, that inversion of disability as the horror, because nothing here that's shown in Railway shows the disability itself as being horrifying, right? It's always the choices being made. And I actually really like that you never see a time when he doesn't have this heterochromia. But we'll talk a little bit more about the heterochromia later. So we have this fading in and out, this fog. It's a little hard to tell. Is he turning into this fog? Is he just coming in and out of it? And he is so sad. And then he gets just blown away, just absolutely blown away by something. He falls. We have this. And again, this is why I ask, is he dreaming about what happened in the last round? Is he having a premonition? There's, it's clearly implied that this version of him is unclothed, and we assume that it's a version of him. We don't even know that for certain. I know that I saw a lot of people saying that it must have been like the version of him that we see at the end, but why would he not be dressed? So we actually have reason to believe that this is another version. This is a version of him that we don't see at any other point. The only job of this part of him is to drag him down the stairs and imprison him. That's its only job. He falls into the prison. He's put into the prison. The blanket comes off of him. Maybe he pulls it down himself. I don't know. Now, here's something that you probably noticed, but maybe not. The design, the actual set design is really interesting. So look at these blood bags. So the whole point of this is that it's like empty blood bags, right? They have crystals on them. They have these crystals. They're basically empty. There's nothing that they'd, where are they coming from? And there's so many of them. There's like all of these racks of these empty blood bags. And maybe the implication is that he's been here for a while, but it's just like lukewarm blood in, and what would be the IV is instead this luxury, these crystals. And there's something about that faux luxury that's so interesting to me, that idea that like there's the pretension of beauty here, but there's no sustenance underneath it. So he's in this prison and he's running low on blood. It's not out yet. How long has he been here? We don't know. Has there ever been enough blood? We don't know. Very unclear, very unclear. The inmates, is he thinking about the inmates again? I assume he's fantasizing about them. I assume that that's what's happening here. He remembers that there are inmates and he goes like, that would be much better blood than this weird Swarovski pearl blood. There's pearls here. There's like a different thing here. I love all of the red curtaining that implies that it's covered in blood, but again, it is a beautiful thing with no sustenance, right? The sink that's meant to be a prison sink, and it almost has that like metal shitty sink quality, but it's marble. Luxury, meaningless luxury, right? Absolutely meaningless luxury. This is another thing that tells us that we are in a weird situation, whether it's a dream or whether it's a mental place or something. Because what the fuck is going on with the set dressing here? Like, there's this picket fence attached to a brick wall that is part of the prison cell, like this utilitarian prison cell that even just here, this is just a normal wall back here. That's not a brick wall. Like, come on, play. That wall back there is not a brick wall. So this looks almost like it could be a normal prison cell, but then it's still the same place. We can tell it's still the same place because of those blood bags. And then there's a coat rack with his damn coat on it. And this is another thing that's interesting to me about the Chan at the end. Why does he put the coat back? Because he takes the coat. Why does he put it back? So there's something going on with this coat too. And there's this beautiful coat rack. And that's the only piece of furnishing besides all of the like faux medical equipment. And then this brick wall with a white picket fence just put on top of it for reasons. So it's a bonkers setting, right? There's something fundamentally wrong with the setting itself. He puts on these gloves. You don't see him put on the gloves. And I'm going to come back to the gloves later. But he puts on these gloves and then bends the prison bars open. How does he get out of that prison door? This is just again, it's a transition that doesn't make sense because look at this prison door. This bending those bars open, which he's spending a lot of effort to do, right? So it's not like he's just yanking them out. He can't fit his Dorito shoulders through those bars. So we have no idea what happened there. The implication is that his cell was down here, but that's just an implication. There could be an entire new music video in between breaking out of that prison and into this building, is still covered in this fake blood, this, drapery. So we have this mental landscape. Somewhere he acquired this bondage bag and this cane also. We also don't know where he got those things from. He just has them. When we're thinking about the dissociation, amnesia, we don't know. And we don't know that he knows either. It is very possible that all of the things that we don't know, that we can't answer, that are totally baffling to us, are also totally baffling to him. That discontinuity of landscape, the walls that don't make sense, the single piece of furnishing that doesn't make sense. That might not be depersonalization, but it could be derealization. It feels like things are a dream. So, we are pretending that we're here. We're surrounded by this fake blood that looks like sheets. That inherent eroticism of the vampire story, surrounded by this luxurious drapery. He's staring into our soul, hold tight to them railings. So he's looking at these inmates and thinking about food, I guess, or thinking about something, thinking about subjugation, thinking about sex. We have this dreamlike quality. Oh, and this is actually a great shot. You see what I mean about the DPR Ian, that neck piece that he has going right there? It's like a direct statement piece. So he potentially dissociates. He turns off and on again. He switches, right? There's this big flash of the karmic idea that he's about to do bad things and he's going to get punished for them. But also maybe that he is punishing the inmates for having done bad things, right? This cycle that cannot be escaped. Okay, so he does this transformation thing, and those claws came out of the gloves. This is relevant. So the claws come out of the gloves. Now, I do want to say that what I'm going to come at with this might just be like an effects thing. It might just be like it was just missed or something. But we're going to assume that everything was purposeful. You've got the fangs. So this is where things get really interesting. When you go really slowly, supposedly this is him killing inmates. But I want to take a note of a few things. Because I don't know that he actually is. First of all, he no longer has any claws. You do not see claws again. Second of all, look at the way the blood flashes here. So we get this red. Oh my gosh, I accidentally unfull screened that. We get this red, this blood effect, right? It almost looks like it splashes him. It comes all over the place as he supposedly digs his supposed claws into this guy who will die, supposedly. But then it flashes back. There's no blood. There's no splash. There were no claws. There is a blood spurt there in that flash, but there's no residue. There's no evidence that that blood continues to exist. He just shoves him to the side. We can watch it again because it's going to happen. You see? all of the points where he is supposedly killing these people, we don't actually see evidence of that. And here, so every time that there's supposedly, something happening on screen that's like blood or death or murder, and not in a flash, we get this distortion. And you even see, like, it looks similar to the distortion of the environment from before too. There's like, we have that brick. Did you see that up there? How the wall had turned into that brick, that, like, because where did that brick come from? You had all of that viscera that kind of showed up on him, but it's not there. There's no blood on his mouth. He supposedly bit into him. There's no blood on his mouth. So what is he actually doing? And now we have this brick up here again. So there's always this discontinuity of this landscape that just happens over and over and over again. And I think some of it is legitimately like wherever they're filming has like inconsistent walls for some reason. But like, again, let's assume that everything is purposeful by the art for the purpose of analysis. So now there's all this blood on him, supposedly. He also doesn't have his gloves anymore. What happened to his gloves? They look so much like those creatures from Hush. I swear to fuck, they really do. What the fuck is going on here? Like, it's nighttime right now. They're outside. It looks a lot like the nighttime when, like, at the end when he's being chased by himself. But like, what? Because it's gonna be daytime soon, and he's not outside yet. So why are they outside? Like, what was that flash? I don't know. He's subjugating them. He has his gloves back again. It's very confusing. And again, it's probably confusing for him too. Now, I did see some people talking about the heterochromia switching. I don't think it actually does. I think it just has to do with whether you're seeing him through a reflection or not. So here, he's looking at himself in the reflection of something, which is not common in the vampire lore. Is he even actually a vampire? He was staring at himself in the sink earlier. So maybe this is a memory. Maybe this is, maybe the whole thing is a memory. Who knows? And because you can see it's switching between him having blood on his face and him not, right? So there's clearly a before and an after. And then there's this euphoria transition that is completely unexplained. Maybe it's a switch. Maybe it's when we're talking about dissociation, but it's not a part of the narrative that is cohesive. That makes sense. We don't really know what is happening there. Whether it's emotional, whether it's just they thought it looked pretty and they threw it in there, whether it is representing the movement, whether it's representing his own disregard of others, right? Maybe he's thinking about the inmates as crows, as birds, and he's thinking of himself as the master of them in that way. Like, we could throw a lot of things at that, but we really don't know. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's very pretty. Putting down this, it does make me think about the red carpet, actually. And I know that it was a little bit, in the making of, they said it was a little bit of like an impulsive thing to put this down, but it looks like both, like, it makes you think of walking the red carpet as you have this very elegant form walking away. And it's, again, important to note, night here, and there's grass. Where are they? I don't know. Somewhere. But it looks both like that running water, like blood, and like the red carpet. And you have to wonder if there's meaning there. It is now daytime. Presumably in the prison yard. I guess there's grass here, so maybe that the red carpet was. I'm just like, what? Is this just part of the building they were filming at? And if so, why? Why is there this? Sorry, I didn't notice this fencing outside as well. Okay, so that definitely does, though, mean that the prison cell is in the same building. Why the fuck? I have many questions about the fencing on this. Is there a reason for this? Does somebody who understands buildings, can you tell me why this is like this? I'm begging. Because surely they didn't put the fencing on the building just to make a point about nothing making sense. Like, surely that has to just be part of the building. I mean, really dedication if they did put it on there. Oh God. I only just, that's so confusing. So it's daytime now. When it got to be daytime, not sure. But do you see here what I mean about, like, he's not really engaging with them. Like, this version of him, the one with the coat on, isn't really engaging with them. And I do think it actually is the same version. Like, I think at first I was uncertain if they were trying to give us like two different stories happening. I think it is the same version. He just keeps taking off and putting back on his coat. But that does feel like it has to represent something. This version of him is obviously incredibly sadistic and incredibly cruel. And, they show him a lot playing with the inmates. He does this thing that I know emotionally destroyed many bonkers fangirls. This is wild to watch in slow-mo. This is all just like this is all just sex euphemisms. That's all this is. Because, like, what else is he doing? He's just torturing them. And, like, he could climb this gate himself. But no. Some of the inmates are out of the gate. Like, they've clearly climbed over the wall. But then they also will, like, soon disappear. I'm also not quite sure how they're helping with this incredibly ineffective, supposedly barbed wiring that's definitely not doing that. He gets out, right? Now, I want to note, he is covered in blood here, including his tie, right? He is absolutely covered in blood. We're immediately back here. He's back in his cell. When? Why? He has his gloves back, he has his coat back, and he's spotless. I mentioned this on that first walkthrough, but you don't see any blood on his collar there. So he's just pulling himself back, and he's putting his coat back. He's licking blood off of his thumb, which I guess maybe he had blood on his thumb underneath those gloves, but like we don't see any blood. And we don't see any blood on him, on any of his clothes. He sees himself. Now, what used to be here, when we saw earlier, was the table he was lying on. Right? He was like sitting on a table at the beginning. I think. Yeah. Yeah. And now it's him looking at himself. Also, there's another coat rack in the background, and I just need to point out that there is another fucking coat rack without a coat on it, and it baffles me. Why? I don't think that this is like relevant to anything. I just have to point out there's another coat rack back there without a coat on it. So he tells himself to take a seat. There's another weird transition. Is he remembering something? Is he hallucinating? Is he daydreaming? Is he dissociating? Is he like, what's happening there? Casualties. He's about to become a casualty of his own self. Presumably due to the horrible things that he has done to all of these other inmates who maybe also represent himself, who maybe represent other people. He's thinking about this. Is he remembering the euphoria he had 2 hours ago? It's nighttime again. He kills himself with his own cane, which we don't know where he put because we didn't see the cane when he came back. They're in the prison yard again too, right? So like they left the cell. At some point they had to have left the cell. Or they didn't have to leave the cell, right? And they are still in the same place. It is possible that he has just never moved throughout this whole time. This is something that, again, supposedly happened at some point. He's alone here. He is alone at the end of the red carpet that he, like, there is something about, like, if the train represents the industry or represents the band, like, being alone at the end of the red carpet that you have been put on a singular pathway towards. That's rough. Note how there's no other inmates here. Were there ever? Maybe the inmates never existed. There's all of this lightning. He's remembering the time when he was covered in blood again. He's standing on that chair. Has he ever been outside of this prison? Did he ever escape this prison? Or did he just convince himself that he did? Now, this heterochromia, the heterochromia switches. That's part of the reason why you know the difference between the two. So, both of these are him, right? There's some aspect where both of these are part of him, always going after, one of them is always going after others, one of them is always going after himself, but they're both this inherent part. And he looks so sad. He looks so sad about what he just had to do and what he's about to do, and the fact that this version of him is also trapped in this Sisyphean nightmare. Did he take the chair with him? Or was the entire thing of, running down the prison yard its own... Oh, you know what? I only just realized this as watching it, because he was standing on the chair earlier. So there was also a chair out here. That chair just keeps following him around too, which does track based on the fact that the chair is going to follow him out of here and onto the stage as well. But this happens around like, what, 10 seconds into the beginning, right? So when we're actually watching the beginning of this is sort of the same time that this happens. The thing is, he's sitting in this chair and he just stares after this other version of him has been put back into the prison. And again, so we know that whoever put him in the prison at the beginning, who was implied to be naked, is not this version of him, because this version of him is wearing pants. Like, he's wearing pants. So he, watched another version of him throw the first version of him back into this prison? Maybe. And he, takes this chair and drags it away. Which, puts on the jacket, puts on the coat. At some point, puts that coat back on one of the 2 coat racks. Because there are 2 coat racks. And then this sort of leads to a final question, which is, does doing the show turn him into the monster? Because the other option here is not that there is the one vampire who's continuously reliving his own scenario, but that, like, Chan and Chris in the white outfit goes off, does the show, becomes the monster, falls off the stage, and in falling off the stage becomes the monster, becomes the vampire, maybe already is a vampire also, I don't know. The beginning of the music video is the process of him becoming the monster. He is kidnapped and put into the prison and wakes up. And there's always a new other version of him that comes to be at some point. Right? And so each of these are unique. It's not that one version of him or 2 versions of him or 3 versions of him are stuck in the same loop, but that there's a unique version made for every single round. That there is a new Chan at the end made every single time. So that's what I mean when I say more questions than answers. Is that, like, as you start to break that down, it really makes less and less sense. In the music, I sort of see the themes of the music as being divergence, desperation for connection, and domination. And this fits right along in with all of those, right? You have the divergence, you have these three different storylines happening of whatever is going on throughout the entire music video with the Chan and White, the Dracula Chan, and the stage Chan. You have, maybe those are all happening at the same time. I only just thought about that now. Oh, I'd have to think about that more. And it is late at night for me now. So you have this divergence, and the Dracula theming, vampire themes are sort of divergence in and of themselves, because you have the divergence from humanity. The desperation for connection, also very inherent there, right? If you're thinking about turning the inmates, for instance, because it does seem like there is some implication that some of the inmates are being turned during that like sadism arc version of him, releasing the inmates instead of just immediately bleeding them dry. The fact that he keeps returning to the prison, the thing that he knows, maybe that's the thing that he can connect to. The going out on stage to connect to fans, if that red carpet is meant to symbolize the red carpet, right? And the simultaneously feeling chained to it while also striving towards it. And then obviously domination. But I don't need to explain that one. It's real fucking straightforward. And much like, in some ways, some of the tension is in the fact that the method of trying to connect is through domination, and is through cruelty, and is through sadism, rather than being through anything mutually positive. Yeah, so that's Railway. It's been 3 hours of recording, so it'll probably be like 2-hour video. So I'm glad. I sure am glad that I did not decide to do unfair and hallucination in this part. I think they'll be much shorter. Unfair is like medium compared to this, I think. I haven't fully finished my notes on it. Hallucination is interesting, but like actually has much less textual analysis. There's actually a lot more in how it connects to other parts of, or potentially connects to other parts of Stray Kids lore, maybe. But all three of them have a lot to do with, well, sort of the fairy tale aspect or the storytelling aspect. So I think they all fall under that theming very nicely. So I will be back with that at some point in the future. I don't know when. Don't expect it to be soon. But at some point, I will be back with that, and probably also with more cozy lighting. Or maybe not. We'll find out. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, you can keep finding me here more, and my podcast, Stray Kids the Megaverse, in which I talk about things that are not the music, but all of the other Stray Kids stuff. You can find me on Threads. You can find me on Blue Sky under the same names, Meta Skizverse. You can, if you so desire, because you liked this content, give me a tip on Ko-Fi. All of that is in my card, which will be linked also, I guess, in the doobly-doo. Yeah, I also have an Instagram. I don't post there very frequently. I'm not very good at that. I'm not really a content creator by trade. I also don't know how to end this. Bye.